Today, we're going to talk about short forms, or you can say informal speech. Yay! Finally, second graders. 2年生のね、we all started with mass forms, a very polite form, but now we get a bit deeper into Japanese world. We start with the short forms, or informal speech is called. What are these? What is this short forms? Short forms and informal speech. So when we say, are you good? Are you well? As in English, when you mean, or when they mean, how are you? When you meet up, when you just bump into each other on the street, how are you? We say, as in like direct translation, we say, are you good? Are you well? Right? And you say, yes, I'm good, thank you. I'm well. How do we say this? We learned, お元気ですか? Or you might skip or, maybe 元気ですか? As a polite enough. Or very polite, お元気ですか? And in Japanese, yes, I'm good. はい、元気です. That's what we have learned. But there is another way to say this. Totally the same meaning, but different way of saying, different forms. Instead of お元気ですか? You say 元気 with a question mark even. And instead of はい、元気です, we say 元気. お元気ですか? はい、元気です. That's mass form. That's what is called a long form or polite forms. 元気? 元気. You might have heard of this. You might be familiar. They are what is called short forms. Or some say plain form, or it could be also said as informal speech. As I usually mention, in Japanese, the longer and more complicated you speak, the more polite and formal you sound. So you can see お元気ですか and 元気, boom, way shorter and way easier to say. はい、元気です. Even shorter and more like simpler to say. That's as in short forms or informal speech. What you can do when you learn short forms. Short forms can be used in written languages, written Japanese, as in news or poems, novels, or like columns. It's just one way of expressions, one way of the forms. So you could write in mass forms, in long forms, which might give you the impression of polite and, very soft. But short forms, when you use short forms in written languages, it sounds very like neutral, and it just stating what has happened, what would happen, what's been felt, what's been said and stuff. So just one way of expressions. Or as a grammar, when you know short forms, you can say correctly as in I think that blah 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 blah. Or as a quoted speech, which is like somebody said like this, she or he said like this, and stuff like that. So grammatically, you can say this correctly when you know short forms, or you know how this written Japanese is like in the real life. So that's what makes you do know in short forms. And informal speech as well. So casual way of speaking. So that shows intimacy. So it really depends on your relationship, how close you are to your family, to your friends, or to somebody you just met, and stuff. So you can change the way of speech, the way of speaking, depending on what kind of relationship, what kind of intimacy you have with the other person or with other people. But be careful. The reason why we always start with mass form and polite form, because that's because it's the best idea in Japanese society. Like, it's always a good idea to start with the polite way, unless you want to sound very very silly Japanese learners, just, oh, you don't know much about Japanese and stuff. So unless you want to sound like that, it's always the best to start with the mass form and polite form. But when you get a very close friends in Japan, or when you meet younger people like your children, or anyone younger than you, or if you're a higher social status than the other person or the other people, which doesn't sound good, but it just happens what it is in Japan, you can use this informal speech. So especially you can be careful with the boss, teacher, professor as a socially higher status. And even a single year gap, it can be a huge difference in Japanese society. So that's what we have to be very careful. And if you are the younger one, you just don't start this informal speech on your side. So the older one or the higher status one will offer you to switch to informal speech, and then you can do that. So otherwise, you just stick to the mass form or polite form. That's always the best idea. Yeah, that's what you can do with short forms or informal speech. Well, what do they look like? Well, we have learned mass form as in long forms, just like this: do verbs, u verbs, irregular verbs. They conjugate like this: miru, dictionary form, mimasu, mimasen. Hanasu, hanashimasu, hanashimasen. That's some blah, 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 something like that. But miru, hanasu, kuru, taberu, au, suru. This dictionary form is the very affirmative forms of short forms. It's very easy, very easy. But you have to be careful with the negative form. Ru verbs. Ru verb, you just replace ru with nai. And then miru, minai. To look, to watch, to see. A negative form, minai. Taberu, to eat. Negative form, tabenai. So ru replaced with nai. Okay, as easy as it is, ru verbs. But u verbs, they have to be careful. Hanasu, so the last vowel will be a sound plus nai. So hanasu, s remains, and vowels will be changed with a. So hanasanai, hanasanai. A mass form, that's hanashimasen, but the short form, hanasu, hanasanai. Kaeru, kaeranai. And vowel will be changed. But when it comes to the u verbs ending with u sound, and then you have to have w sound before a nai. So au, to meet, to see, will be awanai, awanai. Or kau, to buy, kawanai instead of kaanai, kawanai. You have to have w sound. And then you have negative form of short forms. In a regular verb, as usual, it's completely different. Kuru, konai, suru, shinai. Kuru, to come, negative, konai, suru, to do, shinai. Right, that's how it is in short forms. When it comes to adjectives or nouns, and let's have a look at the present affirmative form. Well, past tense, we'll do that next time. So this time we'll focus on present tense. First, we have a look at affirmative, long forms. E adjective, the most popular E adjective, that's kawaii, cute. Long forms, mass form, kawaii desu, as we have learned. Na adjective, kirei na, kirei desu. Noun plus desu, gakusei desu, you just put this, right? In short forms, kawaii desu, you just drop desu, and that's kawaii. That's it. You can say kawaii desu to strangers, or to the older one, to somebody you just met. But to your friends, to very close friends, you can say kawaii. Just, that's it. Kirei desu. You can say kirei, and that's it. But as in short forms and as in the written languages, usually have da, kirei da, in columns, in news and stuff. But when you just talk to yourself, talk to your friends, kirei is good enough. Noun plus desu, gakusei desu. And then again, as the same as na adjective, gakusei da. as in written languages. So if you casually asked if you're a student or not by a friend, by a younger person, you say, 学生, and that's it. So you don't have to have that in a daily conversation. But in written languages, you have to have that. And present tense negative. いい adjective, かわいい、かわいくないです。な adjective, きれいな、きれいじゃないです。noun, so 学生 student, 学生じゃないです。In short forms, just drop this and that's it. Super easy. かわいくないです。Not cute. かわいくない。That's it. きれいじゃないです。Not beautiful or not clean. きれいじゃない。Drop this. That's it. 学生じゃないです。学生じゃない。Drop this. I'm not student and that's it. That was simple. But the one of the verbs, ある, that there is, there are, or that exists, this ある long forms あります in mass form. Oh, sorry, this is long form, so it should be あります. But the ある as in dictionary form or short form, that would be ない ない. That's it. あるない あるない. There is, there isn't. あるない. Yes and no in Japanese, long forms or polite form. はい yes, いいえ no. はい in short forms. いいえ in short form or informal speech. It's a bit difficult to pronounce. Long vowels. Or we just say n sound. With the mouth closed, like or with a little bit like mouth opened. That's a bit difficult to distinguish, but maybe you can see as somebody's nodding or shaking their head. Hopefully. Right. Short forms and informal speech. For example, do you eat with chopsticks? How do you say this in Japanese? Or it's beautiful, isn't it? In mass form or long forms, we usually say, お箸で食べますか? Do you eat with chopsticks? お箸で食べますか? I mean, you can drop o, but you know, I'm a polite person, so I put o to chopsticks as well. So お箸で食べますか? Do you eat with chopsticks? Or it's beautiful, isn't it? This, you know, ね as the suffix. You say きれいですね. What do they look like when they change into informal speech? お箸で食べますか? You might drop o because it's very informal and casual. And 食べますか would be 食べる with a little bit nuance or a pitch, a little bit high. 食べる instead of お箸で食べる you just go up a bit. And then that's it. So you don't have to worry about ka, and you don't have to worry about conjugation into mass form. You just, you know, use the dictionary form for short forms of informal speech when it comes to the usual verbs. And きれいですね. This ね as a suffix at the end. We just looked at the you have to have that as in written languages. So it has to be also remembered whenever you need a suffix at the end. きれいだよ, きれいだね, きれいだな. You know, these suffix at the end, we need to remember to put that when it's na adjective. So when it's e adjective, for example, かわいい. And then かわいいですね as in mass form, but かわいいね. And then you don't need that. So when it's about na adjective and noun, you have to remember this that. Right. And then at last, we're going to have a look at the example of the expression that I think blah, blah, blah thing. So when you get a grip of these short forms, you can say correctly this expression, these sentences. I think it's delicious. I think it's beautiful. So you have put the short forms of it's delicious or it's beautiful before と思います. And then you can say this. 美味しいと思います. But again, 美味しい is an e adjective, so you don't have to worry about that. But 綺麗な, again, that's an adjective. So you have to put 綺麗だと思います. This that is very important. And then I hear lots of Japanese learners would just get mixed up with this na adjective, e adjective whenever they would say, I think it's blah, blah, blah. I think blah, blah, blah. So, かわいいだと思います. That's wrong. 綺麗と思います. That's also wrong. And かわいい, you don't need that. But 綺麗な, you do need that. So, as long as you know this, you will sound fluent and pera pera. So, that's it for this lecture. Thank you for watching. お疲れ様でした. If you want to practice Japanese with us and meet your new classmates, you're more than welcome to join us. おかえりスクール